I'm ready, D. I'm still not there. It's a good energy, but it's after lunchtime. And I know that this is probably true for everyone here, that I understand that I could listen to every one of these speakers all day, taking in so much. And so appreciative for everyone who's given already and everyone who's gonna be sharing now. Instead of rather downstairs. So we've heard this morning how communities are using and applying the labels. And this afternoon, we're going to learn and hear a little bit more about the technology behind the labels and their application. We've also heard about archives, museums, and genomics and genetics data. And this next panel will do some work to connect them, right? Connect these areas of work, these areas of application, and the technical infrastructures needed for that application. And we're going to start with the literature report and then go into people.
Good afternoon. I'm still Darren Ranco. Foundation for the charity of Ranco programs of the University of Maine. I'm joined by my colleague Andy here.
Hi, I'm Andy Rominger. We're going to share this presentation with you.
Yeah. Really work this out. So. I want to say a little bit about where this part of our work came from. Obviously, I shared this MOU, and there's a long process at the University of Maine in terms of tribal collaborations. This came out of, pretty far along the line of those collaborations and in the slight aftermath of the MOU that I referenced before. There was, beginning in 2019, during 2018, we were applying for an NSF grant through the NSF EPSCOR program, which is the, sorry, I brought it up on my phone. EPSCOR is the established program to stimulate competitive research. It's one of the larger NSF research and development grants. It only goes to states that don't get their fair share of sort of R&D monies from the National Science Foundation. So Maine is one of those states. The theme chosen for that year is a statewide grant, but the Maine EPSCOR office that is housed at the R1 institution, which is our campus. In the theme of that, it has every 5 years, these grants have a theme. The theme for this one that started in 2019 was eDNA, environmental DNA. And into that, I had already worked with some PIs to have our youth science program, the Wabanaki Youth and Science program, which uses 2-eyed seeing for Indigenous science education. It's a really great middle and high school, post-secondary Indigenous science education program. We wanted to bring Indigenous partnerships into the environmental DNA context. And we just basically said, we'll explore those in the grant, probably put up benchmarks of like present eDNA to these communities, do this kind of work. And then we also said we wanted to do trainings for around Indigenous science and research ethics around Indigenous peoples within the context of eDNA. Very early on, and part of the EPSCOR grants is they bring in new faculty into institutions focused on these particular frameworks. Andy is one of those hires, correct? Yes. And so he's a specialist in this area of research. Where we went from like 0 to whatever level this you'll hear here, which is, I don't know, 30 miles an hour, happened very quickly, partly because of an influx of new faculty like Andy. We did a training for graduate students around research ethics and environmental DNA, and basically just how do you do research in Indigenous territories, like 101. And the grad students were like, people who do environmental DNA, they're like, how do we do this? Like, we need to know more. And so they kept pushing and pushing. And then the faculty were like, well, there are these frameworks out there for ethical, this connection between fair and care. We'll talk about these things. And ultimately they were just like, Darren, how do we do this? And I was like, I don't know, I'll call Jane. So then I called Jane. And I was like, we're doing this whole thing, like, I know that there's a discussion. I heard a presentation about the HRO Maori context that this was being done. But I had no idea about it. One of the biggest, so it because of our established partnerships, we're and the interest of this emergent set of relationships and MOUs, we were able to articulate a whole paradigm of study where we were no longer seeing the entirety of our region as just, you know, a blank space, but Indigenous territory. So we had that framework already. And because we have research and other kinds of relationship with our tribal historic preservation officers at each of the tribal nations, we were able to kind of build partnerships relatively quickly and solve some of the bugaboos that would pretty quickly that might be challenging in other institutional contexts that I ended up thinking. That's all.
Great. Okay, I'll take this one.
Okay.
All right, here we go. So yeah, thanks Darren for setting that up, and I want to start by thanking all of our partners in this, who include the tribal historic preservation officers, so many folks at Rich and local context, working with Native Land Digital for a little while, and then our collaborators at University of Maine. And the slides you'll see are kind of put together by these folks. And I didn't know that arrow points to me. I didn't know if I was going to be on that side or this side. So all right. So the way I want to talk about this is two parallel narratives. And you know, of course, they feed back on each other. But because I'm so brainwashed by the Western tradition, I'm going to linearize this feedback and start with the technical implementation. You know, how we put into our database, into our workflows, the biocultural notices on our end as a research institution, and then use that as a scaffolding to talk about the relationships that we built and are continuing to build. All right, that's what those lines and dots mean, but I skipped that part. Okay, so our technical implementation. As Darren mentioned, this is a big, you know, this one of these big grants, and it gave us money to sample all of it down the coast of what is now Maine. Those dots are the sampling points, and Darren and I put this map together to overlay those points on the traditional territory. Just again, as a reminder of where we are and what we're doing. So just a tiny bit of detail about what we're doing. So this eDNA idea is that we all shed DNA into the environment, organisms shed DNA into the environment. A person or a group of people could sample that, process it in the lab, sequence the DNA, and get some sense of what diversity is there, biological diversity is there. Recognizing that this is being done on Indigenous homelands, the idea is to intervene in what is typically just a pure settler process, to have a decolonial intervention in that by placing these notices on the digital and physical samples of the research. So technically how we do that, or getting a little more technical, before we go in the field and when we're in the field, we have an app that we use called Survey 123, which is served by Esri. And we also can go into both context and make a project. Then we can link those to entering the unique identifier into Survey 123. So we go and collect the sample, we bring it back to the lab, process it in the lab, which looks like extracting the DNA and then putting the DNA extract in a freezer to preserve it for potential future uses, as well as the physical sample, which is water that's been passed through a very, very fine filter to catch all of the DNA on it. And then we sequence Okay, the sequencing data and the environmental metadata that we collected in the field, what that looks like is just dumping everything into a very, very well designed database. And I'm putting these BC notices at all the spots where we either want to or currently are able to put one of these tags. So then open repositories is ultimately where the terms of the NSF grant mandate that these data go. So the dream is to have the notice and ultimately labels propagate forward with the data. Then one of the final outputs is various types of reports that we would be producing. So reports to our partners, education materials, peer-reviewed manuscripts. And I just want to highlight in the pink that these two, the peer-reviewed manuscripts and the open repositories, are things outside of our control presently. And of course, that's, I think, a big topic of what folks are thinking about here, of how to move our efforts forward into those spaces. All right, so just some examples. Here's what that Survey 123 app looks like. So this is literally all of our field techs take this on their phone into the field. It has a land acknowledgement on there. And it has, like I said, the ability to link to a pre-existing local context project. So it's not automated, like you have to type in that long old unique identifier. More on that in a second. This QR code will take you to our web portal for our database. And what you'll see is we have the Open to Collaborate notice on there. And then on the actual data record, same QR code, data record, the notice sits as well. And critically, like Joshua's talk, this is automated. This is automated. So pulled via the API to populate our local database. And of course, that's important that it's automated API update because the whole purpose of the notice is to be replaced by a label. And you want to then be able to update your database with that information. And the reason you want to update that information is because when a user goes to your database and downloads the data, you want them to have the most current and relevant information about Indigenous sovereignty and governance of those data. All right, so this is currently what we're able to do. And this has been in large part implemented by a graduate student, Melissa Kimball, who was perhaps greatly underpaid for her skill set and being able to develop all this stuff. But we'll get a little more into the relationship building part in a second. Okay, so just to say, this is not specific to our one group, but just to kind of repeat the refrain that I think a lot of us are thinking of is that this is great to have this accomplishment, but we still want to be able to push it forward into these more typical final destinations for this type of biological research, which would be peer-reviewed publications and these big open online repositories. And again, currently it's not. Well, the mechanisms are not there. But it's been really a very cool experience that I'm grateful to have had to be invited into this group in this space to start thinking about ways to do that, to have a meeting with the NCBI higher-ups to try to put pressure on them to adopt this, the notices and labels. That's hopefully we continue to make progress in that. All right, so that's been the technical implementation. I just want to do a couple of highlights on the relationship building. So of course, the first, like Darren mentioned, was that, in this project, we were asking Darren, overtaxing Darren probably about what are we supposed to do with all this. And Darren opened up this relationship and collaboration with Jane and Natalie. And in part, this was in a class that I taught with Darren Gray on community engaged science, which was a cool thing to do. And shout out to Aaron for that. And so Beth Davis was here and Jen Smith Mayo were students in that class and really took this project on and really made a lot of the advancements that we see. So of course, relationship building had to occur with the tribes as well. Thanks to the MOU and thanks to Darren, thanks to Jane, having worked with tribal historic preservation officers for the Botany of Nations and what is now Maine. This was, I think a lot more fruitful than they could have otherwise been. One interesting story is about asking representatives of the tribal nations, asking the TIPOs, how do you want us to communicate about these data that come from your lands? And being, kind of, Western scientists, being geospatial people, we got a little bit perhaps overly fixated and obsessed with, these boundaries that we can pull from. Do I have it? Yeah, we can pull from the nativeland.ca website with their API. We can pull these boundaries, we can overlap them with our sites, we can make unique projects for every combination of every overlap, and but then someone thankfully just said we should just ask the TIPOs how they want this to be done. And they said, we want to know about everything that's happening with this territory, just tell us everything.
That was me. I know this sounds stupid. Yeah, and I think what occurs in across our tribal nations, across the tribal historic preservation officers, who, if you don't all know, like they have as sovereign nations, we have a role in historic preservation decisions, designations, and there's probably a master class somewhere on all that if you don't know that word. But they are used to being notified by, for example, the federal government or the Park Service or whoever, when something is happening in our lands, and they had already set up a protocol with various federal entities to all be notified at once around, the highway that's being built or the park that's being expanded or whatever. And they have, as well, not be tribal nations, we have our own internal protocol as to who puts eyes on things, and they had already worked that out. I mean, and the idea that we had to ask, and that we were like trying to go into the nativelands.ca and be like, hey, your line isn't quite right over there, and you should probably, the idea of mapping indigenous territory into some clear boundary is problematic and challenging for all the ways that you probably all suspect. But that level of asking, and so that dialogue of having protocols already established through tribal entities that represent tribal and cultural interests, and we had already formulated and if you're not aware of what eDNA research looks like and why the tribes might even be interested in it, it's because it can give both a contemporary and historic take on species distribution and concentrations. So it has a lot of work, applicable work related to ecological restoration, management issues that are hugely important to our tribes. So the idea that this is that formulation of why they're even interested in this, and you see that in terms of the species management issues in New Zealand, with the mountain as well. So that, and then the protection of certain locations became very important as well. That so this approach, the TIPO kind of approach, is to protect sacred sites, protect sites of particular interest. And one of the next technical problems, I can't even talk about it, is this prior approval, or at least its vetting of site data, which sites are being collected eDNA data. And it's similar to our MOU, where we're like, that's a culturally sensitive object. There are going to be culturally sensitive places that will be no-go for data collection in eDNA because of particular tribal protocols that want to protect those sites. That's my next. I'm trying to preempt the next relational question.
Well, I may not have had a slide for that.
That's all right.
But my sixth one. That's all I need. But the timing was another issue, right? That there are not only certain sites, but certain times at certain sites.
Okay. Yes.
And so this, I literally got an email yesterday, Darren from Shawna, that we finally now are able to share our proposed sampling schedule with the TIPOs and get feedback on should we adjust that to respect any kind of no-goes. Okay, let's see. All right, there was relationship building with the users as well to try to promote uptake and adoption of this. I think the most effective thing we did was added language to our training manuals for undergrads and grads talking about this. Less so effective with the older folks, but they're not the ones in the field anyway. But an interesting question that we had was, when they're out in the field with this app, do we want to make it a little bit challenging or in some way introduce some kind of friction in engaging with recognizing where they are, such that they really pause to think, oh, this is where I am, this is what I'm doing, these are the indigenous lands I'm on, or waters. Or do we make it as frictionless as possible so that everyone adopts it? If you have to, go through too many clicks, you're not going to do it. What's more valuable, the learning or the documentation of the provenance and rights? It turns out we couldn't really do either because we're using this closed source thing, but it speaks to, I think, future opportunity to write new software for field data entry and then address this question at that point. And then the last relationship I'll talk about is with F-score. So everything we did here, from the limited amount of tweaking we could do on the closed source tools to the application of the notices, ultimately had to get approved by the F-score office. I think mostly echoes people's experience so far. There's some fear about ceding control of a data resource that $20 million went into producing. However, for us, it seemed to be overcome by all the radical.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
A lot of friends.
But I think there really was the majority of the sentiment that was enthusiasm for engaging in this new protocol.
Yeah, and also because this wasn't pre-designed with the grant either, right? So this is an opportunistic, like, we didn't put biocultural notices in the eDNA grant. We didn't contemplate it. So part of, for the leadership, the lead PI, it was like, will any of this violate, we agreed to deliver MSF, but in terms of the open source thing and all of that. And so they had to do that. I mean, next time, right, it will go in the next seed, and we've applied for other grants, that it will be structured from the very beginning. That's very critical.
Yeah. All right. That's all I got.
That's good. Okay.
There we go. Cool. So I'm deeply appreciative prior to talks and what happened this morning, so I can launch into a little bit more high-level abstract discussions about what the hub looks like, and my technical perspective on this. And this is really, I just want to clarify that this is really from the lens of a field researcher, someone who's out there collecting things, and possibly an institutional perspective. I'm a lot more familiar with working directly with researchers myself. So just a little bit about me. I'm kind of involved in a lot of different areas. I'm a data curator at Berkeley Natural History Museums. I'm also the creator of the Genomic Observatory's metadatabase. I've worked on adapting ontologies for annotating data sources. I'm also a livestock farmer, so a little bit, like sense of place, and, what goes on in a particular environment. I'm fortunate to manage 320 acres in Burgess, Willamette Valley. So I have to, that's kind of like when I see my land base personally there. Another aspect, which I didn't put here, but is really as I see myself as the technical architect of the hub. And this came about because I was been doing geom and field databases for a long time, and I met Maui and Jane in New Zealand in 2018. And we had a couple strange trips. We were flying and driving across New Zealand, and we were giving these presentations about PK labels. And we were sitting in bars at night while we were traveling through New Zealand, and we were just shooting around ideas about EC labels. And so all the requirements of the hub and what I see and like wanted to build into the framework, the architecture, is all infused with several kinds of beer in my head. So some of it might seem a little abstract and weird. But I'm going to go through some points here, and these are somewhat uncoupled and random, but these are the things that kind of came out through this process as we were talking about the system that we wanted to see. It didn't exist. We wanted to create it. It's like, okay. So these are the different points. I'm just going to cruise through these slides. We needed something primarily to elevate credibility for field researchers, and this goes into Geom is a data validator for field researchers. You put your data into Geom, it's a level of credibility. So here's a set of rules and constructs that I agree to with my project, my collaborators, my funders, and we said we are going to collect data that has these particular attributes. And so Geom gatekeeps all that data. Will prevent you from loading data into the system that you say you don't want. So as a label, I really like the idea of labels. And I in my first slide, you can't really see it, but there's a little thing that says GitHub and pack size. And pack size is it's a R package that lives in GitHub. And it has these at the top of the tax size R package, just a random package to look up taxonomic names. There's all these little badges that you see up there, and each badge means something different. And these badges were requested by the creator of the repository. They say, I want this badge up there, but importantly, they don't get to determine the color of the badge. Someone else determines that. So they can, for instance, there's a badge up there saying, is the package built properly? And in this case, it's actually funny. In tax size, I took the screenshot and it failed. But there's a machine actually that validates it for them. So if they push their code up there and it's going to try and build it. In this case, it failed. But there's another one called code coverage, and someone else goes to look at how much unit testing did you do on your code. So anybody familiar with coding knows that coders love to test. So if you run a function, does the function do what you think it's going to do? This is like critical. So it'll tell you the code code. So I really like this idea of labels from other sources and other parties to help and elevate credibility. One other thing is that we needed to make these really easy to use. You're talking to field researchers, they're busy, they have agendas, they have limited amount of time in the field, and Andrew's talking about friction. You don't want to have too much friction for a field researcher because they're just going to bypass not doing it. So we wanted to make this, that I put two columns here: researcher tasks and hub tasks. And hub tasks are all oriented into a black box, right? So mostly the researcher doesn't want to deal with everything that goes on in the hub. They want to go to the hub and request a notice. If I'm going to create a project, they got a notice. I got a project identifier, and I can take that project identifier. And if they're using a tool like Geom or ArchiveSpace or any other tool that talks to the local context hub, all they have to do is associate it with their project. And they're essentially done. Any other labels that come back is the responsibility of the hub. Another thing that's kind of like bent my head about this is that labels are mutable. Mutable is just a fancy way of saying that they're liable to change. They don't necessarily have to change, but they're liable. So, as an example, you have an attribute label here, example attribution. It could change in the text. Here it says example attribution with amendments, or it can be removed entirely. So this is critical in terms of the design of something, and we need a dynamic system that can track mutations in the labels themselves. Working with multiple communities, this kind of was a confusing point for me, you know, like in considering how we build a hub and how with a researcher you go out and research. There might be multiple parts. You know, we talked about this idea that the boundaries are fuzzy, and how do you broker relationships among multiple communities, and that is a tall order for a researcher. It's going to be like, no, I don't want to get involved in that level. The really cool thing is working with the hub. The hub has a team of people that actually handle that aspect for you. It's not incumbent on the researcher. So it's really a great idea as a researcher. I'm going to say, I'm going to go to the hub. Instead of working with communities directly, I'm going to interact solely with the hub. Another aspect here, just in terms of the technical architecture, is that we want to make notices and perhaps labels that could be attached to them later, represented by a result of the URI. So this is crucial in terms of enabling, you know, the dynamic nature of the network. Here's an example of the URI that has the hub web services, first part of it, and the second part of this URI is the project identifier. So if you type that into the URL of the web browser, or better yet, it can be just embedded in a web page and have the web browser make the request for you. Typically, it's the web browser or some other system makes the request for you. But since it's a local context then responds with JSON. This is the machine-to-machine communication data format that describes all the labels you have rendered on a web page. And just a little note, you know, that there's coding back there. Josh, it's like absolutely fantastic that he wrote a plugin for a system for people to implement this. For other developers, actually an idea I have in my head is to have example scripts and example code that you can easily implement in systems that you can make asynchronous requests. So you can display your page, and as your page is displaying, another request could go on from the background and wait for a response from the hub and display those. Getting into rights. So now I had to look up, we were talking about rights a couple nights ago at dinner. And I was like, what is a right to go with years, you know? So rights can be legal, social, or ethical principles. So I've highlighted social or ethical principles importantly because the labels are not legal. They're not a legal thing. And one thing we've talked about in terms of interacting with standard vocabularies is the Dublin Core rights skill. And probably a lot of you are familiar with Dublin Core, describing a set of metadata fields. And this was used in the mainly for the publishing industry, but it's been adopted by a lot of other people. For example, Darwin Core has a rights field. And if you look at Darwin Core, the Darwin Core rights field is actually points to Dublin Core rights. Dublin Core rights describes the broad definition of rights, including people. And for a lot of biodiversity records, it's already popular with legal permit data and other copyright data that's in there. So how do we represent it in the community? And Jane, there's your definition. You asked for a definition. Yeah, I wrote it there. A local context identifier represented as a URI. So the local context identifier, this is a proposal for a term. Right now we don't have a scheme or a namespace to put this, but we're going to put the term out there and focus on writing a very clear definition for what we want. And hopefully it gets picked up and then we can sort out where it should live. But a local context identifier represented as a URI, which resolves to a local context project. And then it gives an example. Local context labels describe a set of extra legal rights supporting cultural and biological heritage materials. And then for more information. So that's just an idea about, you know, how can we describe notices and labels in a single term that can be picked up by community standard vocabularies, which allows us to interact with INSCC, and other vocabularies and other data repositories across the globe. And then finally, this is my last thing, the labels are transitive, and this is not from grammar, it's from logic. You can also say that it's, you can call it inheritance as well. But if you apply a label at the project level, that the labels would apply to all collecting events associated with that project. And a collecting event would yield multiple specimens, and an individual specimen could yield multiple tissues. And each individual tissue could yield multiple sequences, and those sequences can yield publications. So it's important to note that when you apply it at one level, it goes across the entire sequence and chain of derivatives that you normally see in your collecting biological chain. I don't know. I'm going to just go through this last part really quickly because we've already seen an example application. It's the Geome homepage. There's an open to collaborate notice put onto the Geome homepage saying, hey, Geome itself is wanting to collaborate. Here's an example project landing page. And this project landing page has a local context identifier underlined in red there. So if you search the data, here's a particular sample with all of the sample metadata attributes. You see a set of labels in the upper right. You can click on the parent event. So what is the collecting event this came from? The collecting event has a map. Here's the location. And then you can see the labels are also applied to the event as well. So if you click on one of the labels, you can go back to the hub itself, and it'll tell you about the project. Yeah, that's the end of the story.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me here today. I really appreciate it. I'm Shawna Sadler. I am a settler. I'm from Calgary, Alberta, Canada, Western Canada, and I just want to truly recognize the traditional peoples of Southern Alberta, specifically the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Botany of Nations, the Dakota Nations Métis, and all the people who make their homes on Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta. So thank you again for having me here today. I am with ORCID, and if you've not heard of us before, that's okay, because we're still fairly new. We're on the technology side of research. We issue unique IDs to researchers or to people. So to qualify for an ORCID ID, you have to be a human being over the age of 18. So you don't have to be professional researcher, it can be anyone in the community. So earlier we talked about the community engaged research projects. So even people in the community that are participating who are not officially part of the university can register for an ORCID and get credit for their contributions to the research. So it's a really exciting area. And so what we do as I'm a performer, so I'm going to move around a bit. So you can see, so this is an article that Jane and Maui published, I think last year. And you can see Jane included her ORCID ID when she submitted this manuscript to publishers. There's a little green dot by her name. If you click on that green dot, it'll take you to Jane's record. And you can see Maui, no green dot. We're gonna have to talk to Maui about so I'm going to show you my record because apparently Jane and I need to have a party to work on populating her working record. So here's my record. So you can see here is my ORCID ID. It's a 16-digit number here, ending in 5304. Just some of the information about me. I've done a few publications. I wouldn't call myself a researcher, but I have worked for universities, published, and presented lots. So what we do with work is we issue that unique ID number to people because there's a few people named Jane Anderson. Not many, now we've had some stuff, but there's a few Janes. And so we know exactly which Jane you are. And then we issue you a record so you can start populating all your research activities as a professional researcher in this record. And then the third thing we do is we have APIs. We've heard lots about APIs today to transfer the data between different organizations, different systems. So I'll get into that in a little bit. So some of the systems that we transfer, this is our kind of a fun infographic. So what I do, this is Jane, her ORCID ID in the center.
And then with her record, all the data that will soon be in her record. We've got the APIs to connect to systems all through the scholarly ecosystem. So you can see we connect to publishers, to funders, universities, or people who employ researchers, because researchers have to submit annual reports too. How many papers did you publish last year? Jane, tell us each and every one of them. So what we do is we get publishers. So when Jane sent her ORCID ID to the publisher says, thank you very much, you're now published, they write the citation to her ORCID record for her. So when Jane has to update her annual report for NYU, she can just log into ORCID and you send that data straight through. So Jane doesn't have to re-enter that data. And so funders, universities, and publishers like that because the data flows through very quickly. We've timed it, it's about 40 minutes from the time of requesting the data to go through your ORCID record to the other organization system. This is the data from the originator, and so most of the time that's the accurate data. It's when people re-enter data that mistakes happen. It also interrupts. They've got better things to do than to enter data about the publication from last year, which they might not even remember. So, and then we also, this group here, we also work with lots of different vendors and open source platforms to integrate ORCID into their platforms to help with that data transfer. So, before I get into how local contexts and ORCID are working together, just a quick little background about ORCID. So we just want to make sure that everyone's really clear. We are a nonprofit organization and we're global and we support researchers in every field. So it's never a dull day at work, I'll tell you that. But we are a nonprofit. We registered about 10 years ago. We just had our 10th anniversary, which is exciting. We do have incredible global adoption and adoption across all subject areas. And the digital humanities is our last. Those humanists, a little resistant to the technologies. That's okay. We're supportive of that. But again, just to make sure we reiterate, we're community-based. We have a board based on our members, and then we're researcher-focused. That's our goal. We need to support researchers first. So I'll go through that. We do have sibling organizations that we work closely with. So these cross-referencing data site are also paid providers. They provide some identifiers, and they're also community and nonprofit, community-based and nonprofit organizations. Cross-ref issues unique identifiers mostly to publishers, so for publications, journal articles mostly. They're just starting to provide unique identifiers for funding. So they're working with funders now too. So when you get an award because your proposal was genius, it will be awarded with unique IDs to reference that specific award. Data site usually works with data sets, as you can imagine. So when you create your data set from the field work, you can publish it with the unique ID number so it can be clearly identified. Okay, so local contacts and working together for a few years. And so working for big supporters, of course, with the FAIR principles, and it leads us naturally to be supportive of the CARA principles as well. So we're very supportive of DITA and the Local Contacts Project. We're hoping to be part of that technical infrastructure to help implement and make the CARA principles actionable. So with the development of the Local Contacts platform, as researchers, if you register and you create your profile in local context, you can include your ORCID ID in your profile in the local context platform. So here's a quick screenshot of mine, and I've included my ORCID ID in the local context. You can see I haven't done anything yet, but hopefully that'll change. Now, I've been working with some of the people in the local context group, and we're brainstorming ideas right now. And so, so one of the ideas is that in that ORCID record, we collect lots of information about people if you like. There's always other research. But we've got a section for other IDs, and if you'd like, you can include your local context researcher ID in your ORCID record as well. Next, we've got a section for websites and social links. So Rose was able to add local context, but we to collaborate in that section. And so we'll have to work with the team about what the URL is for that, but that's something that's doable if you like. And this is something that local context has proposed to ORCID. I'm not sure how we can do it quite yet, but it's a really great idea. Because in your ORCID record, you can list all your publications. And so wouldn't it be lovely if we could include the labels in that citation? So we kind of think about ORCID, our records tend to be like a bit of a transit station for metadata, going from the originator to system ORCID that usually goes on someplace else. We recycle the data. And we use Unicode to inform this data. So we're not sure how to quite, if we can get that graphic in there yet, but you know what, we can think about it, we can figure something out. So we're still, it's early days, but we're working. So I think one of the things we're going to be speaking about soon are the notices, because those are going to be relevant to researchers. And so researchers, possibly who are professional researchers approaching Indigenous communities to conduct research, and then the flip side, you know, also Indigenous communities who want to notice researchers. So we're considering how ORCID can support the adoption of notices in the ORCID record, in the ORCID system. So I think I'm going to read this infographic, but now I'm out of the local context graphic to Jane in the center here with her ORCID ID. And just thinking about the data that's coming from local context hub in the ORCID record and how that data can get moved to funders, publishers, and institutions. And so I had a bit of a brainstorm and thought, oh, actually, that could be kind of powerful. Because for the funders, I know the NIH and NSF have Indigenous policies, and they really want researchers to behave themselves. And how do they demonstrate good behavior and due diligence? And there's a possibility that, you know, the notices could be part of that. And ORCID, our ORCID records are connected to their forms. So when the researchers have to apply or they have to do an update, they can use the data in their ORCID record to pre-populate it. So maybe some of the local context data should flow through to show good behavior and due diligence. But also with some of the institutional systems, when you do update your annual report to your employer, the research employer, you also have to demonstrate good behavior and due diligence to your employer. The publishers, and I think Jane, you're speaking with some of the publishers now, how that data can flow from local context up into the publishers, and so we can be part of that infrastructure, if you like. And then just working with some of the different vendors out there. There's some pretty big vendors that really like research data, and we got to make sure that they collect it properly and send it through the whole research ecosystem properly too. So we can help there as well. You know, I'll stop there, and if you have questions later, thanks so much.
I'm Marina McDougall. I'm the Vice President of Experience Engagement at the Academy of Natural Sciences in Philadelphia. My background is as an interdisciplinary curator. Both I'll get kind of switch gears a little bit. I'm going to share with you an exhibition in making. We're in a research development phase, and we've been working closely with local context to develop it. So it's called Botany of Nations. I should also just say I'm really honored to participate in this summit. Local context has been amazing. Jane's been a real intellectual partner on the project, and we're just at the beginning of getting on the hub. And so, grateful to the whole crew. And it's just been amazing to learn about what everybody does here. It's interesting to represent my institution as somebody developing exhibitions and public programs, but local context has such huge implications as I'm learning for field work, and also our library and archives. So I kind of wish I had, a lot of my colleagues here, but I'm so happy it's being recorded so I can share it later. So this exhibition, Botany of Nations, is planned for 2026, the sesquicentennial of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And it aims to center Indigenous knowledges. So just to share a little bit of context, the Academy is considered the first institution of natural sciences of its kind in the Americas. It was founded in 1812 by 6 amateur scientists for the encouragement and cultivation of the sciences and the advancement of useful learning. So this is an image from a project today. 10 years ago, the Academy became affiliated with Drexel University, and under the current leadership, we're in the midst of quite a transformation. Our current approaches include interweaving methods of art and science, as well as embodying the ideals of inclusion, diversity, equity, and access to learning. So, as well as bringing to the fore the Academy's scientific research, collections, library and archives material in relation to cultural dialogues and discourses of our day. This project, which is a decolonizing project, has the endorsement of the Academy's president and CEO, Scott Cooper, as well as our board of trustees, which James tells me is quite unusual for many organizations. So we think to be kind of proud. So the Botany of Nations exhibition grows out of one of the oldest botany herbariums in the country, a collection of 222 pressed plants that were gathered and pressed during the Lewis and Clark War of Discovery of 1804 to 1806. They're housed at the Academy and combined holdings of both the Academy and the American Philosophical Society. And I should note that I first learned about the work of local context through APS, who works closely with local context. So, slide. So American school children learn about the Lewis and Clark War of Discovery at the time of the Louisiana Purchase, as part of a narrative of American expansion and manifest destiny. So this is a National Park Service map showing the route from St. Louis to the Pacific. What they generally don't learn about are the scientific aims of the expedition, or the 50 sovereign nations traversed, and the generous Indigenous guides and leaders that contributed to knowledges to the discovery made. One of the guides that assisted in this project was the Auricera elder Tune, a survivor of epidemics of the 1770s and 1780s that decimated Auricera populations from 4,000 to 500. Tune was a great diplomat who spoke 11 languages and dialects. He agreed to accompany Lewis and Clark to the Mandan and Hidatsa villages, and later accepted an invitation to Washington, D.C. to meet President Jefferson. Despite the grave misgivings against the wishes of his tribe, Tune tragically passed away during the journey in D.C. The map that was passed to a White House chef ended up in the French Bibliothèque Nationale of Paris. And there's a wonderful paper I would recommend to you by Christopher Steinke. It's called Here's My Country, and it has this as an interactive map. I think I can share the link if anybody is interested. So the map depicts sacred Auricera sites of Turtle Lake, Buffalo Lake, and Medicine Rock. And what's really interesting to do is compare the map with the maps that were produced by Clark and other writings related to the expedition. So what we can see very clearly with this is what was valued and what was not valued. So the things that were valued were geographical details, lakes, swamps, mountains, woods, prairies, roads, things that were useful for navigation, and the things that were dismissed and devalued were Indian place names, landmarks, the historical and religious landscape of Tune's homeland. So just to give you a little overview of Botany of Nations, Botany of Nations will offer rich counter narratives to the prevailing account of Meriwether Lewis and William Clark's War of Discovery, to explore lands west of the Mississippi River, a story that has been foundational to instilling a sense of national identity in the U.S. The Botany of Nations will forefront the voices and perspectives of Indigenous people who for millennia inhabited and sustainably managed the lands that Lewis and Clark traversed, and who contributed richly to the scientific knowledge advanced by the expedition. Your collaboration with botanists, historians of science, partnering organizations like Local Context, and Native Knowledge Conferred, the Academy will bring the story of the 222 plant specimens gathered by Lewis to life through a combination of Western scientific and Indigenous ethnobotanical perspectives to create a compelling, culturally layered view of the remarkable plants of North America. So we applied for an NEH grant. We've just been invited to apply for a Q grant, and that it's as a traveling exhibition. And we're hoping to also have a digital component so that kiosks can also go to sites, over sites. So the exhibition will show how the Herbarium, which features some of the oldest plant specimens in the country, and the ongoing cultivation of heritage plants through agroecology and traditional foodways, safeguards a biodiverse future and sovereignty in an age of species loss and climate change. So one of our main collaborators is ethnobotanist Enrique Salmon. I don't know if any of you know his amazing work. He wrote this book, Iwagara, that is a kinship of people and plants, kind of introducing the field of ethnobotany to a more general public audiences. He's originally from the Southwest. He teaches at Hayward State. It highlights 50 of the most important plants to Native American cultures with a mix of traditional and Western scientific knowledge. One of the interesting things we did is we took his table of contents and sort of mapped it onto what the plants were in the Lewis and Clark collection and kind of found the areas of overlap. And that was really cool. Another key partner is local context. And these labels, we should notice how long it's taken as to get these up. Just went up this week. We're just thrilled to have this on the homepage for the Academy, the Opening to Collaborate label. So the local context tools will help enable collaboration. What we're hoping is to co-create this show with Indigenous researchers, cultural keepers to help us interpret the plants according to their histories and food ways. To date, we have loaded 10 plants from the herbarium onto the local context tab as well. I'm sorry, our botany collections manager did that. And then we've also added these other labels. So this is our research page. And as I mentioned, the Academy has two main areas of research. One is in field ecology, mostly focused on the waterways of the greater Philadelphia area, as well as in systematics. So, you know, I think some of these practices have been adopted. One of the main great findings at the Academy was Tiktaalik rosé, which was this transitional fish from the Devonian, and that was found in the Canadian Arctic, and it was repatriated. So we have a replica of it at the Academy. So I know some of these practices are our scientists follow them, but it hasn't been so systematic. So there's a lot we can learn from this community. And then we've just also put the biocultural label up onto the Lewis and Clark webpage. I just wanted to share a couple more things. Okay, so our methods. We formed decolonizing knowledge, decentralizing the dominant Eurocentric narratives of settlers and colonizers to reflect worldviews, perspectives, and the voices of Indigenous people. Counter narratives transform the expedition story from a tale of colonial discovery to one of collaboration and visitation, of the Lewis and Clark Party venturing into the territories of sovereign tribal nations that were older, richer, and more complex than the newcomers could fathom or document. Co-creative collaborative approaches, enabling the representation of cultural values and philosophies of contemporary knowledge keepers. Ethnobotanical storytelling, illuminating the multitudinous ways in which indigenous cultures cultivate and use the many plants that Lewis collected during the expedition. So we have formed a Botany of Nations Advisory Council. One of the many special people who've agreed to participate is Susha, founder and founder of Natives, Sean Sherman. Many of you might know his restaurant in Minneapolis. And actually, we thought we just saw him walking down the street. And then this is actually Meriwether Lewis was trained in botany in Philadelphia before he started on the trip. One of his longest journal entries is on the Comets route. So I wanted to show you this to you. It's like 2 full pages. And it details where the plant would be located, what kind of conditions you find it in this kind of damp soil. It did really very detailed noticing of the plant structure, as well as the ways that it was cultivated and prepared to make that common root bread. And so, speaking of useful knowledge, could this be useful today? Is our question. So we have, NEH really asks you to describe a whole exhibition, which is very interesting if you're trying to co-create one. So we've kind of set up a framework with the idea of once we actually, when we receive money and can pay collaborators, build this is basically the structure we think could work, but we're going to see what comes with it. So we've identified, original specimens and artifacts, something like the two-day map, or holdings in museums like the Smithsonian. The herbarium sheets, we'd like to actually feature the local context labels to make the public more aware of kind of the collection practices and metadata and all of that. And interactive digital display and here's a common street in the field. What it actually looks like. This is believe it or not, this bread has been preserved at Smithsonian. In the museum. And this is a kind of a rough exhibition floor plan. It has, let's see, when you enter the gallery, this is for the Academy's teacher gallery, which is an art historic reading room. It has an area, the first area is called Nations Meet. The second section is actually it's more about collecting and recollecting, and the third area is about futures, so looking at food futures. And we have talked about 5 different plants being featured: ponderosa of pine, tobacco, chokecherry, sage, and promise root that are open depending on where the interest goes. And then I just wanted to show one more image, which is a record floor plan. One of the interesting things is that because we have so much information from the Lewis and Clark journals, we can geolocate the plants, and this would make a really rich interactive experience. So, and then we have a short film that is, of course, but it's Andreas Burgess, who's a filmmaker who's worked with local context, made this little trailer about our project. So, different than the film that you've all seen probably on the Passamaquoddy tribe, and that whole work that they did with the Library of Congress in interpreting the wax cylinders. Ours is just on the sort of beginning of something that we don't know what will happen yet. So it's interesting, I think, for local context, just to follow an institution that's interested in this work, but doesn't really know what it's doing without help with a lot of guidance. So, thank you so much.
I've always seen museums and the practice of science as a cultural project. There's certain ideologies that are just embedded by nature into museums, and then other worldviews that are completely left out. Certain things get valued, other things are not valued in those choices that are made of what goes behind the walls of museums. There's an interesting relationship between museum artifacts and a world outside of our doors that's much more holistic, that's related to the land, that's related to cultural practices, that it seems that we could tie these artifacts to in a much more rich way.
Lewis and Clark, which is a famous pair of names, actually had another backstory that not a lot of people knew about. It was the science of the expedition, and that's what the plants represented. Several hundred plants, dried and pressed, put in folders, and stored in a nice, safe place. Why do we have the plants? Why do we still have them? And what are they used for today? And what was the context in which they were collected that now we can look at with different eyes? We see in more detail the Native Americans who are there.
What Lewis and Clark, quote unquote, discovered is founded upon Native knowledge, deep knowledge of a place.
There's a list of all the nations that they encountered. It must number well over 50 or 60. Lewis was immersed in this, talking to the native peoples he was encountering, learning from them what they did with certain plants and what was useful, what was not. And in some cases, he wrote little notes about what the natives used them for, what they told him about. This is the tobacco which they smoke. This is the tobacco they cultivate. They use this plant by mashing it up and applying some water and putting it on fresh wounds.
We have information, but we have an impoverished record of that exchange that made these herbarium sheets possible. So how do we reintegrate that? What other kinds of information might be added to enrich them? That's what we don't know quite yet, and that's what we're very excited to see.
Thank you. Jane shared with me something there, which is that it's quite something to sit and like this. Quite something to sit with archives and all of the biocultural data that we've been talking about today, while at the same time sitting with the technological structure behind the movement of these labels. Really appreciative to this panel for giving us a little glimpse of what that nexus is, and yeah, thank you for explaining, giving some clear explanations and applications. A little moment of definition, just in case anyone either here or being like me have looked up some few things. Let's see, URI, unique record identifier. API, application and programming interface.
I could be guilty of all.
Director of contents, Logan Jane, and would love to be here. You should be here. That's right for that. So hi, Molly. And TK labels, traditional knowledge labels, and the BC labels, the biocultural labels. Oh, and I just want to take a second to lift up this friction, this what was in that slide about do we add friction to encourage that work, or do we eliminate friction to encourage engagement? I'm really going to be sitting with that in all of our Decolonial and work going forward. And I'm happy to announce we're going to have a coffee break right now, 15 minutes. And then we're going to come back for another Stoner panel with Riley and Stephanie and Kyolu. And then we'll be able to have a bit of a bigger discussion, bringing in speaking from this panel and that. So 15 minutes coffee break. We'll be back at 3.